The question is simple. Did he fool it? Did the main suspect in the Black Dahlia case trick the lie detector? The answer isn't simple at all. It's tangled up in a brutal murder, a brilliant and dark man, and a machine that promised to read the human soul. To get to the answer, you have to go back to Los Angeles in 1947. You have to understand the suspect. And you have to understand what a lie detector really was back then. It started with a body. On January 15th, 1947, a woman walking with her child in a vacant lot in Lambert Park, Los Angeles, saw something strange. She thought it was a mannequin, discarded and broken. It was not a mannequin. It was the body of Elizabeth Short. She was 22 years old. She came to Hollywood with dreams, like so many others. She worked as a waitress. She drifted between apartments and acquaintances. The press later nicknamed her the Black Dahlia, a name that stuck and became legendary. But before the legend, she was just a person who met a terrible end. Her body was severed at the waist. It was drained of blood. It was cleaned. The killer had arranged her in a grotesque pose. Her face was cut from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a permanent nightmarish smile called a Glasgow smile. This wasn't just a murder, it was a statement. It was a piece of horrific theater. The Los Angeles Police Department was overwhelmed. The press went wild. It was the biggest story in the country. Everyone had a theory. Hundreds of suspects were interviewed. Confessions, most of them fake, poured in. The investigation was a massive, sprawling mess. The killer even taunted the police, sending them a package with some of Short's belongings and a letter made from cut-out newspaper clippings. The trail was everywhere and nowhere. It went cold for years. Then, things shifted. The focus eventually narrowed onto one man, Dr. George Hodel. To understand the polygraph test, you first have to understand him. George Hodel was not your average murder suspect. He was a genius. He reportedly had an IQ of 186. He was a child prodigy who enrolled in college at 15. He became a doctor, a specialist in venereal diseases, and ran a successful clinic in Los Angeles. He was wealthy, he was sophisticated, he lived in a strange, beautiful house designed by Lloyd Wright, son of the famous Frank Lloyd Wright. He was part of the surrealist art scene, friends with people like the artist Man Ray and the director John Huston. But there was another side to George Hodel, a much darker side. His own family described him as a sadistic, controlling man. He held wild parties, orgies at his home. He was a man of secrets and appetites. The first time he really came onto the Lefties' radar wasn't for the Black Dahlia murder. It was for something else. In 1949, his own 14-year-old daughter, Tamar, accused him of sexual abuse. It was a sensational trial. Tamar's testimony was harrowing, but Hodel had powerful lawyers. He was a prominent doctor. He discredited his daughter, painting her as a promiscuous liar. In the end, he was acquitted. The Lapda was not convinced. They believed he was guilty of the incest, and they started to wonder what else he was capable of. The DA's office put him under surveillance. They planted microphones in his famous house. This was a secret operation, a last-ditch effort to catch a man they were sure was a monster. The recordings they captured were chilling. They heard Hodel talking to himself and to visitors. He was paranoid, angry that police were watching him. And then they heard this. Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. That was the smoking gun. Or it should have been. The secretary he mentioned, Ruth Spaulding, had died of a drug overdose. Her death was ruled a suicide, but police now suspected Hodel had killed her to silence her. They also had circumstantial evidence connecting him to Elizabeth Short. Witnesses placed a woman who looked like Short at his clinic, where Hodel was a surgeon. He had the skills to perform the precise bisection of her body. His handwriting seemed to match notes sent by the killer. The Lapdead had their man. They just needed to break him. They needed a confession. They brought him in. And they brought out the machine, the polygraph. Now we have to talk about that machine. In the 1940s, the polygraph was cutting-edge technology. It was like something out of science fiction. The most common model was the Keeler polygraph. It wasn't a computer. It was a box of analog instruments. It measured three things. First, your breathing. Rubber tubes, called pneumographs, were strapped around your chest and stomach. As you breathed in and out, the tubes expanded and contracted, moving a needle that drew a line on a rolling piece of paper. Second, your cardiovascular activity. A blood pressure cuff was wrapped around your arm, just like at the doctor's office. It measured your heart rate and blood pressure. Another needle drew another line. Third, your sweat. Electrodes were attached to your fingertips. They measured the electrical conductivity of your skin, a process called galvanic skin response. When you get nervous, you sweat, even a tiny, unnoticeable amount. Salt and sweat conducts electricity, so the more you sweat, the more the needle jumps. The theory was simple. Lying is stressful. When a person tells a lie, their brain triggers a fight or flight response. The body releases adrenaline, the heart beats faster, blood pressure rises, breathing becomes shallow, you start to sweat. The polygraph doesn't detect lies. It detects the physiological signs of stress that are supposed to happen when you lie. The key figure in a polygraph test wasn't the machine, it was the examiner. The examiner was part scientist, part psychologist, and part interrogator. Their job was to design the questions and interpret the squiggly lines on the paper. They would start with control questions, simple questions they knew the answer to, just to get a baseline reading of the subject's normal physiological state. Is your name George Hodel? Are you in Los Angeles? Then they would ask irrelevant questions to see how the subject reacted when there was no pressure. Is the sky blue? And then came the relevant questions, the ones that mattered. Did you know Elizabeth Short? Were you with her the week she was killed? Did you kill Elizabeth Short? The examiner would look at the charts. If the needles jumped wildly on the relevant questions compared to the control questions, it was marked as deception indicated. If the line stayed steady, it was no deception indicated. But here's the problem. The machine was crude, and the theory was full of holes. What if you're just a nervous person? Being strapped to a machine in a police station and accused of a horrific murder is a stressful situation for anyone, innocent or guilty. Your heart might race just because you're scared. What if you're a calm, cold person? Being a psychopath, someone who doesn't feel guilt or fear in the same way most people do. Your body might not produce the same stress response when you lie. And what about countermeasures? Could you beat it? People thought so. They advised suspects to put a tack in their shoe. When a control question was asked, they would press down on the tack. The pain would cause a physiological spike, making their truthful response look just as stressful as their lying response. This would confuse the results. Others tried to control their breathing to stay perfectly calm to meditate. So, when George Hodel sat down for his polygraph test in 1950, he wasn't facing an infallible truth machine. He was facing a flawed piece of technology operated by a man who had to make a judgment call based on squiggly lines. The examiner was Lieutenant D.W. Man of the Lapdead. Hodel underwent 3 separate polygraph sessions over several days. The questions were direct. They asked him about Elizabeth Short. They asked him about his secretary, Ruth Spaulding. They asked him if he was the Black Dahlia killer. And George Hodel, the brilliant doctor, sat there, strapped to the machine, and answered. He denied everything. He denied knowing Elizabeth Short. He denied killing her. He denied killing his secretary. Lieutenant Mann watched the needles. He studied the graphs. At the end of it all, he wrote his report, and his conclusion was the most frustrating one possible. Inconclusive. The report, which was later uncovered by Hodel's own son, Steve, stated that the results did not clear Dr. Hodel. On some questions, his responses indicated deception. On others, they didn't. There were spikes, but not consistent ones. The report noted that Hodel seemed to be making a conscious effort to defeat the test. Mann wrote that Hodel's reactions were not the type normally found in an innocent person. But he couldn't definitively say he was lying. It wasn't a pass. It wasn't a fail. It was a maybe. A shrug. So did he fool the polygraph? Let's look at the possibilities. The first possibility is that George Hodel was innocent. If he was innocent, then the test was simply a mess. The stress of the accusation, the fear of being framed for a crime he didn't commit, especially after just enduring the public shame of the incest trial, could have easily caused his physiological responses to go haywire. An innocent person's body can scream liar on a polygraph chart simply out of terror. In this scenario, he didn't fool the machine. The machine and the examiner simply failed to read the situation correctly. The inconclusive result was an accurate reflection of a flawed test administered to a terrified, innocent man. The second possibility is that he was guilty, and he was a psychopath. This is the theory favored by many, including his son, Steve Hodel, who became a homicide detective and spent years building a case against his own father. A psychopath doesn't experience empathy or remorse. Their emotional responses are blunted. When they lie, they may not feel the internal conflict or fear that triggers the fight-or-flight response. George Hodel, with his alleged history of sadism and manipulation, fits this profile. He could have lied with a calm heart and steady hands, his body betraying nothing. The few spikes the machine did pick up might have been minor flickers of annoyance or exertion, not guilt. In this case, he didn't so much fool the machine as he was simply incompatible with it. The polygraph was designed to measure the reactions of a normal human being, and if Hodel was a true psychopath, he was not a normal human being. The third possibility, and perhaps the most compelling, is that he was guilty, and he consciously beat the test. Remember, this was a man with a genius-level IQ. He was a doctor. He understood human physiology better than the police officers questioning him. He would have understood the basic principles of the machine. It measured breathing, heart rate, and sweat. It's plausible that he used his intellect and medical knowledge to control his body. He could have used controlled breathing techniques, keeping his respiration slow, and even to keep that needle steady. He could have mentally detached himself, thinking about complex medical problems or abstract ideas to keep his mind off the emotional weight of the questions. He might have even used subtle physical countermeasures, like clenching his muscles or biting his tongue during controlled questions, to create false spikes, making his real lies harder to distinguish. The examiners note that he was making a conscious effort to defeat the test supports this theory. Mann felt something was off. He sensed Hodel was playing a game with him, manipulating his own body to cloud the results. Hodel wasn't just answering questions, he was performing. In this scenario, he absolutely fooled the polygraph. He outsmarted the machine and its operator. The inconclusive result had enormous consequences. The district attorney, Frank S. Hogan, reviewed the case. He had the chilling surveillance tapes. He had the circumstantial evidence. But he didn't have a confession. He didn't have a murder weapon. And the futuristic new technology that was supposed to give him a clear answer had instead given him mud. Without a definitive deception indicated from the polygraph, the DA felt his case was too weak to take to a jury. He couldn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. George Hodel was never charged with the murder of Elizabeth Short. Shortly after the polygraph tests, realizing the police were closing in and would not give up, Hodel fled the country. He abandoned his family and his medical practice and moved to Asia, where he lived for decades. He never returned to live in the United States. To many, this was a clear admission of guilt. The story was mostly forgotten until decades later, when Steve Hodel began his own investigation after his father's death. He found old photos in his father's belongings. One of them was of a dark-haired woman he was convinced was Elizabeth Short. That discovery sent him down a rabbit hole, leading him to uncover the old police files, the surveillance transcripts, and the inconclusive polygraph report. He became convinced his father was not only the Black Dahlia killer, but also a serial killer responsible for numerous other unsolved murders. So we come back to the original question, did he fool it? There is no definitive proof. But the weight of the evidence suggests that the most likely answer is yes. He fooled it, or at least he rendered it useless. He was either too psychopathic for it to read, or too intelligent for it to trap. The polygraph was the Lapdeed's secret weapon, their high-tech gambit to break a brilliant suspect. And it failed. George Hodel walked into that room a prime suspect and walked out a free man, leaving behind only a set of ambiguous, squiggly lines on a piece of paper. Those lines are a perfect metaphor for the Black Dahlia case itself. They hint at a dark truth, but never fully reveal it. They suggest deception, but stop short of providing proof. The 1940s lie detector was a product of its time. It was an optimistic, mechanical attempt to solve the ancient problem of human deceit. It promised certainty in a world of lies. But, in the face of a man like George Hodel, a man of immense intellect and profound darkness, the machine was just a machine. It was a collection of wires, tubes, and needles. And George Hodel, it seems, was more than a match for it. He may have been a monster, but he was a brilliant one, and his final, greatest trick may have been convincing a machine, and by extension the law, that he had no secrets to tell. The truth of what happened to Elizabeth Short died with him. The polygraph, for all its supposed power, could not stop him from taking it to his grave.